she turns to me and she says, Netanya is a very good place to live in because the mayor doesn't allow Arabs to rent apartments here. The fact that I have an Israeli passport and that I am Jewish makes me kind of immune to a lot of things that internationals and even more so Palestinians face here. Let's not forget, we live in an apartheid state, and I'm on the correct side of the apartheid.
Andrey X is a Russian journalist and activist who fled his home country following its invasion of Ukraine. He then moved to Israel, where he obtained citizenship because of his Jewish background. Now, he's using his social media accounts to document and film settler violence in the occupied West Bank, where the UN has recorded at least 650 Israeli settler attacks against Palestinians since October 7th. And now Andrey joins us to speak about it. Andrey, thank you so much for speaking to us on Real Talk. We're gonna learn about you and your story, but I do want to ask you just straight off the get-go, I mean, what are you witnessing on the ground right now?
Well, right now we are having, and I keep saying this every few weeks, I think, in the videos and in whatever reports, that we're witnessing a major escalation. And it seems that after each period, there is another escalation and another escalation. But what we're seeing right now, we haven't seen in 2 decades, about what's going on in the north of the West Bank, in the Tulkarm, Tubas, and especially Jenin refugee camps. There is a massive invasion of the Israeli occupation forces, and there is a massive escalation of settler and army violence across the West Bank. Like you can look at just internal Palestinian chats where they like just tell each other what's happening, and there is just a constant stream of videos of settler attacks, invasions, just cars being today, from this morning, there was a video of a soldier coming up to a car and then shooting a tire just because he felt like it, of a Palestinian truck. Essentially, the West Bank is on fire, and it looks like it will be getting worse.
Over the past year, with the media attention shifting away to the war on Gaza, what's been happening and what have you been witnessing on the ground in the West Bank?
So in October, we knew that everything was going to change. We knew that the West Bank is going to see a massive escalation, and it happened immediately. I think on the 8th of October, I went to the village of Rashash in the South Jordan Valley, where we provide protective presence, stay there, record settler violence if it happens, try to negotiate, try to figure something out in order to reduce the chance of violence and to record it when we can't. And we immediately witnessed a sharp increase in settler invasions in Rashash and in the nearby villages. A month later, Rashash didn't exist. The villagers just left because there was constant pressure on Rashash, but more so the thing that sealed it was an attack on the village of Wadi Asik, which is just neighboring. And there, settlers dressed as soldiers, or whatever you want to call them, they were wearing Israeli military uniform. They invaded the village. They tied up activists who were there, like international and Israeli activists, and stripped them and held them in a room for several hours as they were torturing 2 Palestinians outside. And after that, they just threatened that if the village doesn't leave, then they will just come and massacre it. And after that,
this is
Wadi
something
Asik
you
left,
witnessed,
Rashash
Andrey?
left. My friends were in Wadi Asik. I was in Rashash. I had a bulldozer driven at me, I think either on the same day or around the same time. There, the settlers blocked the entrance into the village. There were multiple invasions with them entering the village and walking around. There was, but this didn't begin in October. There was actually a big attack on the village of Rashash a few months before, where the settlers came and beat several people, including an elderly man, I think it was in his 80s, and broke solar panels and toilets and just did as much damage as possible. So once the attack on Wadi Asik happened, where that happened to my friends, both Wadi Asik and Rashash decided to just leave, and not decided. They were essentially forced to leave under threat of a massacre. And it has been going like that. There have been thousands of people who have been forcibly displaced in the West Bank by settler and army violence. And it's constant and continuous, with more and more places coming under pressure. For the past few months, I've been in the village of Ras Al Oja, next to Jericho. And there, a few months ago, the settlers created a new outpost on private Palestinian land. So even by Israeli law, they are not allowed to do it. And our human rights organization launched complaints, and what they're doing is so illegal that even the occupation forces had to come and tell them to dismantle their outpost a couple of times, which they did, building it up again the next day. And now it has been there for the past 5, I think, months. And they created it right next to the water stream, which is the place where the villages nearby come get their water, and it's the place for gathering of Palestinians from all over the West Bank. And essentially now the settlers and the occupation forces are aiming to just completely overtake that area to make it inaccessible to Palestinians and as unwelcome as possible. And there were multiple cases of attacks on Palestinians, on my friends. And just a couple of weeks ago, I was beaten there by a settler. My right eardrum is ruptured, and it will take several months for me to recover. And this has been, we have seen constant violence, and it has been escalating there as well. For instance, a couple of months ago, there weren't, like, this was one of the first major attacks on activists there. Before then, they were kind of trying to avoid activists and attacking Palestinians only when we're not there. Now they care way less. Now they're absolutely down to attack.
Why do you think there's a shift, Andrey?
It's very difficult to track the reasons for the changes in behavior of the settlers. Sometimes there is a trigger, sometimes there is something in the larger politics of in the larger events that happens, and they find an excuse to, like, attack villages and do a major pogrom, for instance. I think that in general, this is just a project that they set out to do a few months ago. And thanks to the efforts of the leaders of the settler movement and of the leaders of this specific project, they managed to get more and more resources to do it. They're now bringing buses full of settlers there on Fridays in order to make that place as unwelcome as possible for the Palestinians. And they're guarded by the border police and by the army. So whenever they come, the Palestinians just get kicked out downstream. And now they just feel emboldened because after the first few weeks where it was unclear, like, will the army allow them to do the outpost or not? How will the activists react? How in general that will proceed? I think they've generally secured their path towards the ethnic cleansing of that area from the standpoint of the IOF. And they can see that what the activists can do, despite the media attention that we've brought to that area, it's not translating on the ground to international pressure, which we would like to see.
Okay, let's take a step back from all of this, because I do think you have a very fascinating story that I'd like to learn about more. You are Russian. You grew up in Russia. I think following the invasion of Ukraine, you decided to leave. You decided to flee Russia, and you moved to Israel, where you obtained an Israeli passport because of your Jewish background. Can you tell me a bit more about your story, about this trip? Like, you left Russia when?
So I arrived in Tel Aviv at the beginning of February 2022, and I just went there because my grandparents were there for a while. So so essentially I came there just for a couple of weeks. And then on the day that I was supposed to fly back to Russia, Russia invaded Ukraine. And I can't really imagine myself existing in a space and not doing political stuff. And doing political stuff in Russia right now sentences you to jail. So I just immediately applied for Israeli citizenship. And at that point, I didn't really understand what was happening here at all. Because this was very sudden. And essentially, it was all completely out of the blue, and I just had to figure out the bureaucracy and everything. And as that was happening, I was learning more and more about the place, speaking to people, reading books and whatever, because, well, I was here for some unspecified extended period of time, and I felt like I had to learn more about the place that I now inhabit.
Is there one specific example or story that you can recount about basically making you wanting to learn more, especially about what's happening in the West Bank and what's happening in Gaza?
There are a couple of points that are like key events in the context of my political development here that I answer this question with. One was when I was looking for an apartment to rent for my grandparents, and we went to Netanya, which is this city town to the north of Tel Aviv. And I was driving there with a realtor, and at some point, she turns to me and she says, Netanya is a very good place to live in because the mayor doesn't allow Arabs to rent apartments here. And that made me do a double take, not just because that's like an insane policy, but that's also an insane thing to say. Like, it made me question in general, like what kind of society I am in, where like you can just like say that to a person you don't know.
And by Arab, the person meant Palestinians.
Yes, but you will be hard pressed to find like Israelis, especially on the right wing side, who will use the word Palestinian at all. In general, it's part of the whole thing, erasing Palestinian identity, and which is used here to justify that there are no Palestinians, they're just Arabs, so why don't they go to other Arab countries? So in general, in the discourse here, you will hear people say the word Arab, and. Yeah, so
they said that, and then you immediately you started thinking about it more when they said they don't allow Arabs.
I started thinking about it more because in general what I thought I knew about this place is that it's this there is a freedom under the law, 20% of Israeli citizens are Palestinian, and you have this and that. So this Israeli myth of what this place represents, and like I remember before I knew more that like that was the view that I had. Like it wasn't very strong. I didn't have any strong feelings about the place just because I didn't know much. But that was my vision that I had, and it was very quickly falling apart once I actually moved here. Once I spoke to actual Palestinians and actual Israelis and heard what they had to say. And the second moment was when I was working in a Palestinian cafe in Jaffa, and I was speaking to the owner. And he, at some point, we're just standing outside, and he tells me that, he is going to Jordan now in order to see his family. And his family was expelled from Jaffa in 1948. And there are still people alive who lived in Jaffa before 1948 who were physically expelled, and now they're in Jordan. And now his part of the family managed to stay despite the ethnic cleansing, and he now had to go to Jordan just to see them when they can't even come visit him in Jaffa, in the place where they lived for generations. And here I am speaking to this person. At the same time, I'm standing here, a person who doesn't know anything about this place, who's not from this place, whose family maybe lived here 2,000 years ago, and like I can get a passport like this, and I can get like government subsidies and like tax breaks and whatever else. And this just gave me a visceral feeling of unfairness that the legal system here holds, where it's ethnically cleansed hundreds of thousands of people, and now they can't come back to their homes. In the meantime, I can do it easily.
Mm-hmm. And then how did you go from that to what you're doing today? Because you're using your social media, you're documenting and filming a lot of the settler violence and a lot of what's happening on the ground in the West Bank. So how did you go from, you in 2022 to what you're doing today?
It was a long journey. Along the way, as I was discovering more and more about the insanity of the situation here, I met some people who feel the same way, and they introduced me to different activist communities, to different organizations, different groups, and I did that on and off, mostly in Tel Aviv and Jerusalem. And I didn't expect that I would actually stay here for a long period of time. I thought that I would move to somewhere else where I would do something else in regards to journalism, politics, or whatever else. And however, as time went on, I saw that there are so many activist collectives here and so many groups that do this and that, but they are so low in manpower that it's very difficult to achieve something. And whenever you are, in general, just each new person can have a lot of value. Like you can change a lot because of how few people there are, and there is like a dire need for activists, and that's why we keep encouraging people, both with Israeli citizenship and people from abroad, to come and join us in the fields trying to prevent violence, to record, because we just simply often don't have enough manpower for that. So I started getting into that more and more, and especially with the start of the war, as there was a big threat of ethnic cleansing, of an escalation in ethnic cleansing. So at the same time, a lot of people didn't want to go to the West Bank because of safety concerns. So I started going to, we went to spend the first month of the war in Rashash, then went on and off to different other places. We created a media project in Russian covering the occupation and in general trying to contribute to the anti-Zionist discourse in Russian, which is kind of non-existent, but now it is. I didn't think that I would be doing it as intensively as I'm doing it now. Initially, I had the idea of, I'm going to move to the West Bank for a while, maybe for a month and a half. And then we'll see how and what I can do. I thought that my purpose there would be in protective presence. But then we started the media project with covering all of that and trying to take it out into the international community. And that has had some very good results. And we have actually managed to achieve some breakthroughs in certain areas. And we can see from the reaction of the settlers and the IOF that they're really unhappy with the fact that there is more of a spotlight on certain places. There were several times when the army sets up at random checkpoints in the middle of a Palestinian village, which they often do just to assert dominance. And we turn up with cameras and we start asking, what are you doing here? What is the purpose of this? And 5 minutes later, they just leave.
Is this what you mean by protective presence? Because you used that term just a minute ago.
So protective presence generally means just staying in a village in case there is a settler attack, which is the main thing that we do. In terms of all the other types of operations that we do, like escorting shepherds, because when they go out with the flocks, they're often attacked by settlers and the flocks are scattered, and it's very it is the path towards economic damage to the Palestinian communities, and several Palestinian communities have actually been expelled through that manner. So we do that. We accompany shepherds. We just respond to calls whenever there is a house demolition, whenever there is something else. And often just the presence of people with cameras who are not Palestinian, whom you can't just arrest arbitrarily for an undefined period of time, whom you can't just torture at the military base and then throw out, whose car you cannot just confiscate and then never give back and never face any consequences for that. They can do it to Palestinians, they can't do it to people with Israeli passports, with international passports. And so our presence often just that is enough to reduce the chance of violence. And when there is violence, we record it, we post it, we go to court. Sometimes that results in something, sometimes it doesn't. It's it's still we're fighting against a machine which is way bigger than us and way more powerful than us, but we're trying to use whatever tools we have, and hammers are often enough.
Speaking of this machine, Andrey, I mean, one might wonder, the fact that you are an Israeli citizen and doing, being an activist, being a journalist, documenting these things that you're documenting. I mean, doesn't that risk you putting you in trouble with the Israeli government?
It does, and the Israeli government now wants to. I've been arrested many times, and now there are like several cases against me in the court. But the fact that I have an Israeli passport and that I am Jewish makes me kind of immune to a lot of things that internationals and even more so Palestinians face here, because Palestinians are there is a completely lawless world where the IOF can do anything to them in the West Bank. With internationals, they can be deported. With me, they can't do much. Let's not forget, we live in an apartheid state, and I'm on the correct side of the apartheid. There isn't a single Jewish Israeli activist politically in jail for political reasons right now, and there are thousands of Palestinians. So, if they want to put me in prison for this, it would be a big political decision. It would lead to a scandal, and so far they're unwilling to do it. We will see how that develops in the future. So essentially, yes, there is a risk. There is a risk of attack, arrest, harassment. I'm receiving constant death threats. There are a lot of risks in this. Yeah, daily.
From
mostly from Israeli right-wing people who are telling me that they're going to cut my fingers off and whatever.
And how do you deal with that?
I've gotten used to it. That's been the case for about 6 months now.
Do you not report it?
It is pointless. I've spoken to lawyers. They said that you can, but it's not going to lead to anything.
Is it because of what you're doing?
Yeah. It's they are threatening me. It's they're trying to force me to stop me from doing what I'm doing, and threatening to kill me otherwise.
No, I mean the lawyer saying it's pointless for you to report it. Is it because of you're doing what you're doing that it's pointless?
Yes, I mean, yes, and it's very difficult to achieve anything if you are the way that you're treated if you are against the apartheid is very different than if you are in favor of it. And there have been, for instance, whenever there is an incident of direct physical settler violence against Palestinians in the West Bank, somebody asks, some of the Palestinians ask to call the police. We call the police. It arrives, and every time, literally every single time I've seen that, and that has been dozens, the police says, "Go. You need to." The Palestinian who was assaulted needs to go to the police station and file the report. We know how that works. First of all, it's a very difficult thing to do. It takes a lot of time. They need to go with a translator. They will be held there for a long time. Sometimes Palestinians are arrested for completely no reason when they just enter any kind of Israeli government establishment. And also, if you manage to file a complaint, there will be nothing done to it. However, I remember the case of about a month ago when there were some right-wing settler activists who came to harass the Palestinians and activists. And this was really surprising to me because that's the first time that I saw that. He called the police on us, even though there was nothing was happening. There were some people shouting at each other. The police came and arrested my colleague, an activist, on charges of assault. And then they called me in later and also accused me of assault as well, even though there was zero evidence of that because that just simply didn't happen. And they barred both me and him from the West Bank for me for 1 week, him for 2 weeks. And that was
so there were actions that were taken against you, so that you can get barred from entering the West Bank, for example.
Yeah, so that is something that happens to activists all the time. The police can, if you get arrested, that's in 90% of cases, that's what's going to happen. If you have an Israeli passport, they're going to question you. They're going to, like, there will be a case against you, and then you will have to sign a piece of paper if you want to get out. Then they won't arrest you. The case will just lie there. They can take it to court, but they likely won't. And you just sign a paper that you agree not to go to the West Bank for a certain period of time. And if you do, then there will be some sort of repercussions for that. That is something that the police can do very easily without the involvement of courts, but it's up to 15 days. If they take it to court, the court can do more, but that generally doesn't happen. And it's a big hassle for them as well. It's a lot of money. So they generally don't tend to take us to court.
Andrey, can I ask about how you personally feel about the privileges that are afforded to you by your Israeli citizenship?
As time went on, as I lived here for longer and longer, I became progressively more horrified with the difference that with the completely different ways that Palestinians and Israeli Jews are treated here. There was an incident, I think, a couple of weeks ago when another group of right-wing activists came to Ras al-Oja in order to harass human rights advocates and Palestinians. And we were a whole group of people, and one of us was Palestinian with a green identity card. He's from the West Bank, he lives there. And the army and the police arrived, so they decided to, as they often do, hit the person that they can. They arrested the only Palestinian in our group at that moment, and they stole money from him. They stole his property. They took him to a military base and held him on his knees in the sun for 3 hours in the military base. And that is something that they can just do to him, and there will be nothing. There will be no repercussions for that. They do that to my Palestinian friends practically on a daily basis. To me, they physically cannot. So when I am there and I see my friends being taken into an army vehicle and taken away, and this is just like an assertion of dominance by the occupation forces, and them knowing that they can't do anything to me, and me knowing that they can't do anything to me, but they can do whatever they want to my friend. Like, it's, well, my answer to your question is that it's infuriating. It is infuriating that in the same land, there are two completely different legal systems, and what goes even beyond the legal system, because like holding a person in the sun for 3 hours on his knees is torture by all conceivable legal definitions. That's very, very clearly illegal by any laws, but they can do that, and there will be no repercussions. And they can torture Palestinians outside of the outside of their houses while there are activists inside. And there is just so much shit that they can do to Palestinians that it's the feeling of powerlessness is overwhelming when you're just standing there, and you know they can do it to your friends, but they can't do it to you.
When it comes to settler violence, Andrey, I mean, how does it work with respect to your work? I mean, does someone from any of the villages message you, or how do you know where to go and where to film?
So there are a lot of places in the West Bank that are targets of settler violence. We only come to villages that ask for our presence, of course. For instance, Ras al-Oja requested 24/7 presence after the creation of the new outpost. So they gave us a tent in which we're out of which we're based, and now there are people there, 24/7 activists. And essentially, we're just there responding to calls within the village, and from the nearby villages, whenever something happens, we go out. And at the same time, we go in the morning with the shepherds who take their flocks out to graze. And in the evening, we come with the water tankers to get water, because that's the main reason the settler outpost is there. They're there to enact water apartheid and to attack Palestinians when they're trying to get water. So we're there to prevent that. But it varies depending on the village. There are places that just wants people when they're grazing with their flocks. There are villages that just want to, like activists, to respond to calls whenever there are settlers in sight. And there are villages that require 24/7 presence.
And 24/7 presence because they feel like, in a way, your presence is protective? Or is it just about making sure that you're documenting and filming so the media can see this outside of the West Bank?
It's both. The main reason for the villages is to prevent violence. There are places in Masafer Yatta, for instance, where for Palestinian activists, it's very important to take it out into the world to talk about it. There is the region of Masafer Yatta, which received a lot of media attention at some point because it's one of these big frontiers of the colonization of the West Bank. And there are places in the north, for instance, that don't want any media attention because with media attention there comes more violence often, and they just want us there in order to prevent violence as much as possible, in order to accompany them, and in order to like help them go to court if something happens.
I mean, you're witnessing these attacks against Palestinians much more than we do in the West. But what means do the Palestinians have to defend themselves, basically, when they are attacked?
To defend themselves, there are none. If you are Palestinian and you defend against a settler, you will be arrested.
So basically, these attacks are constant, but there's no way to kind of protect yourself from them.
There is no, like, if you are getting physically attacked, the only thing you can do is like wait and hope that it will be over soon. It's there are things where you can do something, where you can, like, in certain areas you can call the army and the police, and then the settlers can tone down their violence. But there are places where the army and the police, and that's most places, where they work completely in tandem with the settlers, so calling them as pointless. But it's also a complicated legal game where, like, somewhere they actually enforce the rule where there is private Palestinian land, then the army can't kick out the Palestinians. But there are places where nobody gives a shit, and Palestinians will be on their private land, even by Israeli law, and the army will just come and kick them out, and there will be no repercussions for them. So it's a complicated landscape. It really depends on the place. But yeah, you can't really defend yourself. You like, from the inside, there is nothing that Palestinians can do, and there is nothing that we can do either. Like, if we defend ourselves, we also get arrested.
I mean, as senior member of Beit Salim, which is an Israel-based human rights organization, recently said this in a former interview. Quote, "The only thing Palestinians have left for them is the camera they're using to document these incidents." I mean, what are your thoughts when you hear this? Is this how you see it too?
I think that there's a lot of truth in that. That's in general, international attention is the only thing that we can really use in order to achieve positive change there, because, like, we won't be solving it from the inside. You won't win this by sending constant appeals to Israeli courts, because they're part of the same system. What you can do is try to apply pressure from the outside with international advocacy, with getting people out into the streets, with making politicians in the West who are for apartheid unelectable, by just agitating among people, and to try to change the vector of politics outside of this land, and by doing that, applying more pressure on the Israeli government here. So far, it has seen local successes. There have been 2 villages that a few years ago were actually under demolition orders, and they managed to stay only because of advocacy of activists from the inside with the West, which then resulted in a lot of pressure on the Israeli government. There have been the case of one of the Gaza freedom flotillas, which was attacked, and there were, I think, 10 activists killed by the occupation forces. And that led to such a big international scandal with foreigners being killed by the IOF that it led to the Israeli government having to relax their blockade on Gaza. So there are like places of local success, but obviously there needs to be a lot more.
And in addition to the violence, what about land grabs from what you've seen and what you've experienced? I mean, Peace Now, an Israeli NGO which monitors settlement building, they said that the recent approvals for settlements by the Israeli government is the largest appropriation of land in the West Bank since Oslo in 1993. So again, have you been seeing this on the ground? What have you been seeing?
Yeah, this specific seizure of land happens in the Jordan Valley where I work, and in general, that is what the occupation has been doing to the West Bank for decades. But now they have a carte blanche because all the attention is on Gaza, or the vast majority of the attention, justifiably so. Plus the settlers are emboldened, and they hold a lot of very like settlers from the West Bank who live in illegal settlements hold the positions of, for instance, national security minister and finance minister. And it's, when you have that kind of power, you can do a lot of stuff, and they are doing a lot of stuff. The land grab was signed by the Minister of Finance, essentially the minister of the settler movement, Smotrich. Yeah, and this generally has been the case everywhere, with more and more lands being taken. There are
and you
many
think
more
the war on
outposts that are
Gaza,
being built.
the war on Gaza has basically provided some sort of smokescreen for the settlers?
For sure. Yeah. And it's, on the one hand, smokescreen. On the other hand, you can justify it easier to the Israeli society, with which there is always some debate about the settler movement. Now it's less so because all the attention is there. And it's impossible to really say what exact logic rules all of the operations there, but it looks like they're just escalating it to take it to the maximum that they can. Now, with the invasion of the northern West Bank, it looks like they're just trying a new thing and seeing if they can do that now, if they can just use Gaza tactics freely in the West Bank. And so
Gaza
far it's
tactics.
working.
What do you mean Gaza tactics?
So I was in Jenin 2 days ago, and in general the city is they use the same tactics as they do in Gaza, with bombardments, with just complete blockades for a long time, with restrictions on movement of ambulances. Ambulances couldn't get into the refugee camp where there was most of the damage done by the occupation forces for 5 days.
This is what you've been seeing.
Yes. And now they started letting ambulances in, and there are bulldozers going all over Jenin, just destroying random infrastructure just all over the place. You can see that, like, there are buildings and they were clearly going somewhere, but just on the way there, the bulldozer will have just gone and to the side, and there is a building with no wall. And what is that building? Just somebody's home. And this is what they've been doing to many places, and that's essentially the strategy of making that place unlivable, the same as they've been doing in Gaza, making sure that, like, even if this ends, it will be beyond difficult to restore any kind of normal civilian life there. And at the same time, they're targeting people who are trying to cover it. There were several journalists, I think, shot in Jenin in the past few days. And there are videos of them, of the occupation forces driving bulldozers at journalists, trying to push them away, and journalists are not allowed in the refugee camp. So yeah, the situation there is very bad, and it's the largest incursion into the West Bank that we've seen in 20 years. And according to government officials, this is just the beginning, and they intend to do more of similar stuff in other places in the West Bank.
And on the personal front, Andrey, how do you cope with all of this? Because you are seeing a lot, and you're taking in a lot, and you're putting yourself in all these different situations. So how do you cope?
With difficulty. It's, you know, there is only so much ethnic cleansing that you can witness with your own eyes before it starts to really affect you mentally in a bad way. And in the moments where that happens and where I feel that particularly sharply, I remember that there are people who cannot choose not to witness it, who cannot choose to get on a plane and fly away by virtue of having been born in the West Bank. And this is their life, and they've witnessed it since they were born. And the occupation is older than some people's grandparents. And it's, you know, it's difficult on everybody. And there is a whole, I think everybody who does anything there is traumatized and has to deal with it in one way or another.
My last question for you, Andrey. If you could summarize one message that you'd like to convey to whoever's watching, to the international community about what's happening in the West Bank, I mean, what would it be?
The one message is that the international community, you are way more important than you think. That what I'm doing on the ground and what all of us are doing on the ground, we're just putting out fires, trying to stem the wave of ethnic cleansing. We will not be able to stop this from the inside. We will not be able to stop the genocide. We will not be able to stop the occupation. This is impossible from the inside. It is possible from the outside. And the developments that I've spoken about, what the protests and what the movement has been doing abroad, it has resulted in positive developments there, and any kind of permanent solution, any kind of actual genuine change in the situation on the ground will come from you. So whatever the international community is doing is extremely important.
On that note, Andrey X, thank you so much for coming on Real Talk and speaking to us.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thank you, Andrey.